Clerk, may I invite you to bring Dr. Loh in? Dr. Loh, good afternoon and welcome. Yeah. For the record, could you please state your name and the position you hold in your organization?
My name is Andrew Loh. I'm also former editor of the Online Citizen. I'm here in my personal capacity.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Loh, the evidence which you will be giving today before the committee will be taken on oath. If you so desire, you can take an affirmation. Clerk, please administer the oath.
Please recite.
I, Andrew Loh, do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence which I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Mr. Loh, please be seated. And again, a warm welcome to the public hearing of the Select Committee on Deliberate Online Falsehoods.
Thank you.
The focus of today's evidence gathering session is for us to put questions to you. You have taken a solemn obligation to answer our questions truthfully. I will now call on Mr. Tong to begin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Loh.
Afternoon.
Thank you very much for your submissions, which we have all read. What I propose to do, which you would have seen us do with the previous witnesses, is to go through your submissions and pause at several places to raise some points with you for clarification and elaboration.
Sure.
The issue of deliberate online falsehoods, I think there are several sub-issues that need to be considered. The first is what it is, what is the impact that we've seen from other witnesses from around the world, the experience that they have demonstrated, some of which is set out in the green paper, and then also what is it that needs to be addressed, and finally how that has to be addressed.
Yes.
So those are some of the issues that arise. Now, I think your position as set out in the paper is that you accept that the concerns about DOFs, if I may just short form it that way, are valid, and you've given some incidents around the world and also that in Singapore and how it might apply in Singapore. Would you agree?
Yes.
And we do also accept that DOFs, I mean, in the nature of how they are purveyed and transmitted, and the purpose of purveying those DOFs in the context of national security issues and so on, tend to play up or play on racial and religious sensitivities. And they, in turn, then use those to seek to undermine social cohesion. By and large, have I summarized your position correctly?
Yes, by and large.
By and large, right. And you also give the example, or you give the analogy that even in the US, a country like the US has been susceptible to it, not immune to it, despite its, I guess, more mature economy and despite its possibly perceived greater media literacy. Then you ask the question in your submission, I think at page 2, then what more like Singapore, which is a small country? Can you elaborate on that, please?
I think in Singapore, we, in my opinion, we don't have a polity that is critical or that is used to critical thinking or that is used to questioning authority, for example. And I understand from my friends who are teachers, they're trying to, impart these skills to their students at the moment. But by and large, and from my own interaction with people and having been involved in the online world for more than 10 years, I do see that there are instances where people are not questioning enough, not critical enough. So I do feel that, yes, as with previous representatives, there is room, I think lots of room for media literacy and for civic education. But apart from that, I think to go beyond that, there is actually a need to change the tone in society itself, if you ask me, in order to combat deliberate online falsehood, which is a term I also have a problem with, actually. Incidentally, something can be deliberate, it can be false, but it may not be as serious as we think it is. I would prefer the word malicious, actually. Malicious and deliberate online falsehood, because that goes to intent. But coming back to what you've asked, I think
I was asking you to just give us a bit more background on your comparison between what's happening in America that we see in the experience there, and you say that even they, as a country like them, is not immune to it,
yeah.
let alone Singapore.
I think the comparison is that in the US, they have greater freedom as guaranteed in their constitution. In Singapore, we have also in the constitution free speech, but it has been circumscribed, it has been curtailed in many ways.
So are you using that to then say that Singapore is more susceptible than the US?
I think that is one. Like I said, the other one is, I think, as with other presenters to this committee, we don't have that natural instinct, for want of a better description, to question, to critique, to investigate.
Right.
I think we are more of a deferential society.
Well, that may or may not be because of the laws that you described in your paper, but it's because one is a Western country, another one is a very much Asian country, which has its own different social, political, cultural.
Yeah, but there are Asian countries which are very critical, and Korea and all that. I mean.
Now, the way you put it, if I just invite you to look at page 2 of your submission, so you compare the US and Singapore at paragraph 2, where you say here on a broader level, as the US 2016 presidential elections experience have shown, even nations as powerful and resourceful as the US are not immune to external parties' attempts to sabotage democratic processes and institutions, let alone a small one like Singapore. So your focus here is, focus in your comparator is really in the nature of the resources and the might of the country between the US and Singapore, correct? That's what you put in your paragraph.
Not just resources, I would think. I think it's the nature of the society itself. Yeah.
Nature of the society and the resources available.
I wasn't really referring to resources, actually. I was more trying to compare how the US, the only superpower in the world at the moment.
Some people might disagree.
Yeah, some people might disagree. How, and given its history and its culture of outspokenness and, and all that, it's still susceptible.
Yeah, but that's the point, isn't it? I mean, it's outspoken, has a different culture, as you put it. It has been the target of DOS. So why do you automatically assume that a jurisdiction or a climate that is less outspoken, assuming that's correct in the first place, would make it even more susceptible to DOS?
Well, I think because, we've been talking about this the last 1 week or so. The ability to distill, to discern information.
But if I may just postulate this with you, I mean, the ability to distill and discern is one thing. I think that's on the media literacy, education point of view, and I think you've heard what Prof. Tan said about this earlier.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, what is the quality of the US, in the US, which is absent in Singapore, which I will suggest is one key reason why DOFs are pervade in the US in the way it is, riding on social fault lines and religious and cultural issues, is that in the US you're allowed to do a lot more. You're allowed to take a picture of the Quran in a derogatory way and post it. You're allowed to frame yourself as doing something that is maybe even anti-Semitic, and that's okay. But not so in Singapore. So I'm trying to understand why you come from the position that because the US is a more open society, more free, as you put it, that necessarily means that Singapore would be more susceptible to DOFs.
I said that even nations as powerful and resourceful as the U.S. are not immune to external parties' attempts. My point is that actually no nation is immune,
Yes.
whether big or small.
Correct. So it's actually really an online global phenomenon that countries have to be concerned about,
Yes.
right? And I think it's also correct that I think you may have heard from the evidence of previous representatives that this has become one of the weapons in national warfare. It doesn't have to be military, it doesn't have to be kinetic, but it's one of the weapons used by countries to soften a target, to destabilize, and to incite a breach in social cohesion. Would you agree?
Yes.
And I think as a smaller country, particularly for us, which is very open geographically and our economy, would you agree that that's something that we should be particularly concerned about?
I think we should be concerned about any threat to our national security, whether it's online or offline. And I think for Singapore, smallness has its advantages and disadvantages.
Of course.
Right. So when it comes to deliberate online falsehood and campaigns against our nation, I think it is also good to keep in mind that it might be easier for us to react to that, being small.
Yes.
Our number of Facebook users, for example, is about 4 million. It's relatively small compared to other countries.
I understand your point.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Loh.
Yeah.
Now, at page 3, you make this point that repeated deliberate publication of DOFs with the intention of doing damage must be dealt with firmly and should be taken by the authorities within the law. I think that's a reflection of your sentiment that DOFs is a problem, and that when it is purveyed in this way, particularly, not only, but particularly when it seeks to undermine national interests, that has to be dealt with firmly. And I think you used the word decisively as well elsewhere in your submission.
Yes.
That would be an accurate reflection of your sentiment.
Yes.
Now, you also then make the point that one has to be mindful of what the intention is.
Yes.
Right. Now, you heard some of the earlier representatives talk about intention. Dan Shefford spoke about intention. I'm not sure if you were here yet, but certainly the previous submitter talked about intention. Now, harm can be caused intentionally or unintentionally, correct? So if we agree that a particular posting or an image is harmful on that assumption, whether I put it out there intentionally or unintentionally, harm is done, right?
Potentially, yes.
Yes. So the difference between intentional and unintentional cannot affect how we deal with that harm that is out there. We have to take steps to deal with the harm. Would you agree?
I think that would depend on the particular situation, and rather than just a broad brush kind of thing.
I agree.
Yeah.
Where I'm coming from is really to say to you or suggest to you that you must have a range of different remedies to fit the situation.
Yeah.
And if you have harm caused unintentionally, that obviously will have to be dealt with differently from harm caused intentionally. And I know you say you want to add in the words maliciously, but that's a definitional issue. But as a broad concept, you would agree?
I see no reason to disagree. Yeah.
Right. So would you agree that if harm has been caused but unintentionally, one has to find remedies to deal with the harm that is out there, whether you clarify, you take down, you make sure that there's an apology, or you make sure that there is a way to redress it, whichever is the range of options chosen best to deal with that harm. But you would treat the person who posted it very differently from someone who posted it intentionally, correct?
Yes.
Right. For the person who posts it or purveys it intentionally, there could well be other consequences. And I think that stands to reason.
Oh, yes.
Right, thank you. So I think we have sort of sketched out the broad parameters of what the issue of DOFs is. you then also deal with questions on how, the different types of responses that will be appropriate in the different situations. Right. Now, I want to show you an exchange that this committee had with Patrick Daniel, and to see if you can agree with some of the propositions there. If I can have the transcript of 23rd March put up. And start with, I'll start with page 268, if I may. Mr. Loh, I'll just take you through some of the excerpts. Stop me if you think I'm going too quickly.
Okay.
But I'll read it out to you as well. So Mr. Shanmugam was asking, I think, a panel, including Mr. Patrick Daniel, some questions, and he said this. If I may pick up on the last point, skipping a few lines down, some sort of quick, say, executive action to take down, coupled with remedy, if the other party wants to challenge it, subsequently to go back, take it down, or rather reinstate it back. But really, the quick takedown is essential to deal with the virality and nature of the digital age, coupled with a range of penalties, depending on if we can use the term culpability, on the state of mind of the individual concerned. That may also then deal with another point that I think Mr. Daniel made, which is that it may have been false, but the person may not have known. And that may then, how you deal with it may be related to what sorts of penalties are imposed. In some cases, if there's no intention but it is false, it could just be a takedown. In some cases, if there is intention and actual deliberateness involved on the part of the person putting it up, then the penalties can be higher. Would you agree with the broad approach outlined here?
For me personally, my threshold for want of a better word, to tolerate content that are disagreeable is quite high. So, like what the previous presenter was saying, sometimes you have the opposite effect of removing something.
The Streisand effect.
Yes, and we have seen that online quite a number of times, in fact. And viewership can triple, quadruple, because
People are curious as to what
Yes.
you have taken down.
Yes. So I would caution, as I said in my submission, that the government must exercise patience and wisdom. And what I mean by that is that you don't overreact, because overreacting will result in overreach. And I think there are examples with regard to my own experience with the government. When in 2015, when I was at DOC, for example, the Protection from Harassment Act was used against us, which we thought was totally unfair. And the act was not meant for that. From all the parliamentary debates that I read, the act was meant for vulnerable individual
That's
people.
been a part of a court application, and the judgment is issued. We'll leave it at that.
Correct.
But I think where you're coming from is this, that yes, we have to deal with or be clear about how we define what that threshold is. But I'm just now focused on what is the appropriate recourse and the different boxes of the recourse for the moment. So if you assume for a moment that whatever is the remedy is the appropriate remedy for that situation, I think you would broadly accept, in fact, I think you do accept, it's similar to what you just told me earlier, that depending on whether there's intention or no intention, there's a gradation of different remedies available,
Yes.
right? And if you look further down the page of this transcripts okay, I stopped at line 23, so if you could just read further. So long as we are focused on falsehoods or opinions based on falsehoods which are apparent to everybody, and what I mean is opinions are made and everybody is aware what those facts are based on which the opinions are made, and those facts themselves are false, then what you do is you have a range of remedies depending on the degree of culpability of the person involved. You would agree with that, correct?
Yes.
Then Mr. Daniel says there must be some way in which the party being penalized is given a right to, and then if you just skip over the next few lines, it says, line 16, Mr. Shanmugam says, that's why I think it probably has to be a multi-stage process. Maybe where the takedown comes immediately after the first order, and then the person who feels that he is not culpable, or anyway his post ought to be up, then be entitled to a right of some neutral place to have that decided. over the page. Line 4, just as he has a right to have the takedown reviewed if there is any penalty, he must also have a right to challenge it appropriately. We haven't sort of buttoned down to that sort of detail, but that is perfectly sensible and civilized, I think. Yes? Mr. Daniel says, thank you. Again, would you agree with that framework?
Yes, on principle, yes.
Yes, right.
But I also did say in my submission that in this sort of framework, sometimes it practically, and it really comes down, because I've gone through it, it comes down to whether the person involved is able to go through that process. By that, I mean financially.
I understand.
Yeah.
I think that's something that has to be taken into account.
Yes.
But what we're trying to just grapple with first is conceptually what that
Yes.
process should look like and what that staging process, which has just been outlined,
Yes.
should look like. Now, you then go on to okay, your report is not paginated, but I think if you go to page 3 of it,
Yeah.
broadly speaking, 3, 4, and part of 5, what you then do is try and frame what should drive the kind of counter remedies or countermeasures there should be. I think we've gone through the first of your points, which is the intent and the level of the intent. You then say that any response should bear in mind that one should not stifle or restrict free public discourse.
Yes.
Correct? Yes. And I'll just want to turn to that now. So in dealing with that, you talk about the media landscape, and you say, this is page 4, top of page 4. You say that there's been raised suspicions of the mainstream media. I mean, I'm not sure we'll debate this. That there are views about the mainstream media and the Edelman publications and other barometers. And I think people still, we've heard from CNA and MediaCorp and SPH,
Yes.
and at least based on what they tell us anecdotally, based on the evidence that they have collected themselves,
Yes.
they do see that people go back to these news sources
Yes.
and people come back, which they tell us is an indication of the trust that people still have in the mainstream media sources.
Yeah.
You wouldn't disagree with that, right?
Actually, I do, because I know that the number of
I thought
likes
so.
you have and the number of retweets and all that from your report does not represent trust.
No, it's not so much the likes or the retweets, which I
Correct.
think I understand where you are coming from.
Yes.
But it's more a question of, when there is a
Yes.
potential news event or a big news event,
Yes.
they say that they see the number of eyeballs landing
Yes.
on their pages.
Yes. And we experienced the same thing at the Online Citizen at Public House, the other website that I ran. My friends in other websites, we all see a spike during the elections, during the Lee siblings disputes with the Prime Minister.
So when there's anything newsworthy, you're saying that people go
Yes.
to both mainstream
So
and to alternative sites.
When I heard the mainstream media executives saying that people go back to them, and that shows there's trust, I really question that. Yeah.
All right. Okay. I think I'll leave you to debate that with them separately.
Yeah.
But you go on to then say that at the third paragraph of that page, same page, you then seem to suggest that there is a differentiation in the way alternative media is treated and the mainstream media is treated. And you cite, amongst others, the Administration of Justice Act.
Yes.
Now, did you follow the debate on the passing of this bill?
Not as closely as I should have.
Right.
Yeah.
Two propositions. One, you would agree that these provisions, they apply equally to mainstream media as they do to alternative sites. Would you accept?
Sorry.
The Act and what it seeks to do, what it seeks to achieve, what it says you can do or can't do, would apply equally to mainstream media as it does to alternative sites. There's no differentiation.
Administration of Justice Act. There is one point about the Act that I question, which is that
No, I'm simply starting from the premise of how they apply in your, you say here, not equally to both of these platforms, the mainstream media and the alternative sites. And I'm just trying to get you to see if you would agree that this act and the provisions contained in this act apply equally to both mainstream as well as to alternative sites.
Administration of Justice Act. My point here, and I mentioned the other acts such as the Election and the Films Act, is that it is not enforced sometimes fairly. For example, on cooling off days, for example, under the Election Act, registered media under the law are allowed to publish election news, while alternative media, because we are not registered, are not allowed to do so.
But that's not a disequal treatment, if I may suggest. That's really a question of how it's licensed and which ones are accredited. But just want to keep to this Administration of Justice Act. You don't really have a basis to disagree with me when I say that it applies equally to both, right?
Yes.
Right.
Correct.
So it's not a question of having an act that applies only to alternative sites, as it were, right?
Sorry, I don't understand what.
In other words, there is no suggestion that this act and the provisions of this act can only apply or should only apply to alternative media.
Yeah,
Right.
correct.
Thank you. You then also go on to say that, well, there are other legislations which question or raise concerns over the police force, IMDA with wide-ranging powers and so on. Now, would you say that even in the context of the latest survey results which show that Singaporeans trust the police, that they have believed that they are safe and that their interests are well looked after by the police?
Yes.
You still say that? Let me
Yes,
just
I
show
do.
you. Let me just show you those findings, and then you can comment on that in the context of this paragraph. If I can put up the Straits Times article of a few days ago, 24th of March. Yes. Just look quickly at the key points. These are the public perception survey results. You have 93% who feel safe walking in their neighborhood at night. 92% felt that general safety and security is good or very good. 90% felt that the police was ready to deal with any major law and order incident and are well prepared to respond to future security needs. 88% felt that police provided high quality service. 87% regarded the police as a world-class crime-fighting organization, and almost half said the installation of police cameras in housing estates made them feel safer. Now, in the context of these issues, I mean, you are raising this point as concerns for Singaporeans, raising concerns for Singaporeans. But how would your view here square off with these findings?
I think first point to note is that the survey was done by the police, not that I'm questioning that, just an observation. And also we need to see the details of how the whole poll and the survey was framed and the questions that were asked and stuff. We all know that questions can be phrased in a certain way to elicit a certain response. Not that I'm questioning this, but even though despite this, the point is that for any authority to be able to enter your home without a warrant and to take any document and anything, in fact, and that I believe was the wording in the law.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think if you want to make that point, I think you should be fair about what exactly are the circumstances in which it can be done. It is not any time and any document.
Yes, I understand.
Yes.
I understand.
Right. So
there were circumstances, yes.
Yes, it's under very strict circumstances.
Yes.
Yes.
Even so, I would say that that might not, in my opinion, is a bit of an overreach. I think because I know MDA officers, they are, according to news reports that I've read, to be put through training by the police and police training. But even so, I think it is quite troubling to me that there are such powers.
You see, ultimately, the purpose of having the police force is to ensure that there's safety and security, law and order.
Correct.
And if these are objectives which meet that purpose, and you see the survey results. I mean, to address your point about these questions raising serious concerns for Singaporeans, I'm just suggesting to you that it doesn't quite square off what you're saying.
I think the survey results don't really relate to this, because these questions about police entering your home without a warrant and all that were not put to those people that were polled in this survey.
But wouldn't you agree it's part of the ecosystem, right? It's part of the range of powers.
Of course, I think
if I-
generally, if
if
I
I-
go out and ask people, they would say yes, you know.
Yes, and I think would you agree that that's at least one marker, if not a good marker, for what the public regards the police institution as?
I think generally, Singaporeans have trust in the police force, in our judicial system and all that. I don't think that is my dispute.
Right. And then in the next paragraph, you then say that mere expression of a view can result in serious consequences. I mean, you're not suggesting here that merely expressing a view can result in arbitrary serious consequences.
Arbitrary as in, I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, put it this way. If I went out there and tomorrow I defamed you, obviously you have a recourse, and I can't exercise my free speech without having regard to some of these constraints. And if I breach these constraints, there are consequences, right?
Yes.
But these consequences are based on law, based on what the rule of law provides, based on rules that we all know. It's quite a different thing to suggest that saying something can result in consequences arbitrarily, which is
No,
a
I
very
didn't
different
say
basket.
arbitrarily.
Right. So you're not suggesting that.
No,
In
I'm not
this paragraph.
suggesting that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can you then give an example of where an expression of a view can then lead to a serious consequence which is unfair?
In fact, I give the example of Mr. Lee Sheng Wu, who posted on his Facebook page about a comment about our judicial system. And subsequently, the case now is pending before the court, I think.
I'm not going to go into that case, which
Yes.
is part of pending in court. But generally, if we have contempt laws, they are for a reason.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Correct.
And if there is a belief that laws are breached
Yes.
and it is referred to court,
Correct.
that's really the rule of law operating,
Yes.
isn't it?
Correct.
Correct.
And
And
it
it
is
is-
the law itself that is being questioned.
But why do you have a quarrel with a law which many parts of the Commonwealth have as well? You don't act in a manner which scandalizes the judiciary. You don't act in a manner which affects matters which are before the courts. You don't publish or post or say something which is in contempt of court. Those are all fairly well established.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and from my limited understanding, I think contempt of court laws in other jurisdictions are quite circumscribed, isn't it? They are quite rarely used. Am I not?
That I don't have the numbers to.
Yes.
I'm not sure you do as well. But the point is, here, these are laws which are meant to preclude someone from personally attacking judges. You can disagree with judgments, you can
Yep.
disagree with outcomes, but I think these are laws which are meant to ensure that no one takes personal issue with the judiciary. Would you agree?
That is what the law is meant to be.
Yes, and there should be
Meant
nothing
to do,
wrong
I
with
mean.
that, right?
Sorry?
And there should be nothing wrong with that, because the judiciary is one of the key pillars, key institutions of our
Yes,
society.
correct.
We don't want to undermine that.
Yes, correct. I fully agree. And that is not what I'm saying. And what I'm saying is that the law itself is problematic, and therefore the enforcement of that law can lead to certain undesirable consequences. For example, and I go back to this example again, Mr. Lee's example, that instead of debating him and challenging his ideas or his claim or his perceived claim, you know, to use the law in this manner will shut down debate. And in order for our society to be a critical one with an ability to ascertain and to question, we need debates like that, and we need opportunities like that, right? To use these sort of opportunities to, well, for want of a better word, to practice, you know, what we may be taught in Media Literacy Council programs and such.
Yes. But Mr. Loh, I mean, I think you would agree that I think as a starting point, you can't just go out there and say things as you like, right? There are, to borrow Prof. Tan's language, he says that, whilst you have the right to speak as you like, there's a concomitant responsibility to be responsible in speech.
Yes.
And by that, he means you must look out for issues like contempt, for questions of undermining privileges of Parliament, for example.
Yes.
You must also be mindful not to say or do anything which incites sedition or is racially motivated.
Yes.
Right.
That really comes down to how much threshold the authorities is willing to give.
No, but-
I believe Dr. Gillian Cole was of the views that falsehood, in fact, have a place
A role.
in public discourse.
I know. She said that, and I think you posted on it as well. Yeah, you see, I do read, alternative media sites,
Yes, now I know.
and I found it interesting.
Thank you.
But the point is, I think one must be clear what the rules of engagement would be, right?
Yes.
You can have free speech, but there must be a balance, and there
Yes.
must be. You can't go out there and as in my earlier example, say something or post something about the Quran in a
Yes.
derogatory way. There's a limit to it.
My view is that I've been doing this for more than 10 years online, interacting with, these people that you might want to be legislating against or their actions, right? And from my experience, I can tell you that if you engage, you may have a different outcome. And the outcome may be better than legislating,
Yes,
than throwing the book at them.
No, don't.
But I am also aware that, like the law minister has been emphasizing, that we are not talking about opinions, even
Yes.
though that itself I question. But that is another issue. We are talking about deliberate online falsehood,
Yes.
and for me, with malicious intent. And what Dr. Carol Soon said was low breach and high breach, which I agree with. And I think that is a determination that the select committee might want to consider.
I think we go back to what we started with when we first started this session, which is you must have the ability to differentiate. And there must be a variegated response depending on what type of issue we are faced with, right? And I think you would not have no issue with that kind of approach.
No, I don't.
And you must also bear in mind that we are looking at falsehoods. I mean, we use the word deliberate online falsehoods. You have a slightly different definition, but I think we all go towards the, I suppose, direction that you must have some level of culpability.
Yes.
And then you start thinking in terms of whether you do countermeasures by way of legislation or whether the best thing to do is to upscale the media literacy of the population and educate better. Some are long-term, some are short-term. But I think where this seems to be going and what a lot of people have told us is that you take all of these options together as a regime that you have, and you need to have this available so that you can have a differentiated response to the issues that is before you at any particular given time. And I think from what I've heard so far from you, you have no difficulty with that.
No, I don't. Although I do have questions about the fair enforcement of that. I am sorry to have to come back to this because from my end, I'm on the receiving end of the legislations that Parliament creates. And sometimes it seems a little unfair to me. And of course I can give you examples, but I shall not go into that. That sometimes the enforcement of it is more strictly done for alternative media than for mainstream media. And I have written about it actually.
In fact, in the language you use here, okay, sorry, again, I don't have the page numbers, but it's about 5 or 6 pages down where you say that the government's position seems to be a militant one.
Yes.
Now, you would agree that that's quite strong a word, quite a harsh
Yes, I realize that.
characterization. And that's not quite fair, isn't it? Because, you see, one of the things we're trying to determine now, which I've been putting to you, is that one must have a ability to have a variegated response. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. And that's on top of the fact that you bring in questions like fact-checking councils. I mean, that's what's been suggested, and I think this committee will consider. You have literacy, education campaigns, and so on. So why would you describe the approach as being militant?
I think because it's my experience since 2006 when I started the Online Citizen with a couple of friends. I remember back then the internet was relatively new, blogging was really very new, and that was one of the reasons why I started the website, because blogging was simple to do. And later on, social media came along. But right from the beginning, the approach that the government took towards alternative media, bloggers, was a very antagonistic, a very confrontational approach. And we were demonized by the mainstream media at a constant level. If I may continue, sorry. But that was fine with us because it's part of debating. It's part of the rough and tough of being online, and we accept that. The thing that really changed my opinion at a more fundamental level was when the government started to create laws or enforce laws against us.
But wait, you've covered this.
Yes.
You see, the point is, if you take that position, then at one level, there's no need for you to be here and no need for you to be making these submissions here. The point here is that I think we are looking at DOS, deliberate online
Yes,
falsehoods
correct.
here. Now on a clean slate, we have looked at what impact it's had elsewhere in the world. I think you agree now that it
Yes.
has impact in Singapore, and it's a serious one. And we must have a range of responses available to
Yes.
government to deal with it. And this committee will consider what is the scope of that,
Yes.
how it should be done, and in what form. So I think all I'm suggesting to you is that it's somewhat premature at this point in time to reach those conclusions, when even the committee themselves has not reached any conclusion. Wouldn't
Yes.
you agree?
Yes, I will agree with that. But my submission and my sharing with the committee is so that you have an idea from my perspective as a practitioner of a user of online space, the things that I faced and my team faced when we started out. In order to avoid unnecessary enforcement against us or people like us who are online. Now, the reason why I brought up my past experiences is that I have always wondered, why would not the government engage instead of confront?
You made the point here. I'm
No,
not
if I may, the point I'm trying to make here is that in order to combat falsehood, deliberate online falsehood, we need everyone on board. And I agree with that because we are talking about things like national security, our sovereignty, our national harmony, and these are very important things. In order to shield ourselves or to build this resilience, you need everyone on board, and that everyone must include the alternative media.
Yeah, I don't agree. I don't disagree. In fact, you say here, you raise an interesting idea. If you just look at towards the end of your submission, you talk about how a fund could be raised, set aside.
Yeah.
And I think the purpose of that really fits in with what you've just said, which is to raise the standards, raise awareness, inform the online community, and I'm quoting from you, on the pitfalls in those areas when publishing content online.
Yes.
And I think that's speaking for myself, it's an interesting idea. I think one certainly that this committee will consider.
Thank you.
And you go on to say that if nothing else, it will signal that the idea is really to go upstream, to inoculate, to make sure that we have built a more resilient society.
Yes.
And I don't think anyone on this committee would disagree with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if I may, I would like to bring up this example. Since we are talking about real life examples, and I think previous presenters have all given examples, and we talk about what happens in other countries and all. I am more interested in what happens in Singapore and whether past incidents have lessons for us.
What is this going towards? What's the frame of your point?
Oh, I'm saying that As a reporter, as an online alternative news site, what would be my limits? In terms of, if I report something that the government says is a fact, and I know that, or at least from my investigation, I know that it is not a fact, and I cannot prove it in court, and neither has the government proved it in court. Now, in such a situation, right, if I publish this story or this series of stories, would I be accused of deliberate online falsehood?
Well, I think that's one of the challenges that this committee
Correct.
will have to grapple with.
And I'm bringing
as
this
I-
up because it is a real life.
I understand. And as I
incident.
said at the outset, what we are trying to grapple with is in several buckets.
Yes.
What is the problem? Then should we deal with it? If so,
Yes.
how? And then what is the mechanism and the process by which that is done?
Yes.
So I take your point. I think those are all issues that will have to be deliberated here and will be considered.
Okay.
And I suggest that we don't jump the gun. Let this committee receive all the evidence, deliberate, and I'm sure the report will be out. We'll consider all of these points, including the points you raised here and your suggestion too. Right, Mr. Loh? Right.
If I may, I think back in 2008 when the government convened the advisory council on the new media, I think it was called AIMS. I think there was a suggestion for a code of conduct for bloggers. I think there was, if I'm not wrong, I don't think it was the council that suggested that, but it was a group of bloggers who suggested that.
Yes.
Because the government was concerned about the kind of content that bloggers were putting out. And incidentally, there were more political bloggers back then than now, which is very disappointing to me.
Well, you remain in that space very actively.
Only on Facebook nowadays, though. But the point is that, yes, we can perhaps consider initiatives like that. I believe that in order to combat deliberate online falsehood, it is not just the government, like some people have said. And in fact, I think the government's role will be quite limited. And I think the real foot on the ground, if you will, are those people who are at the front line.
Yeah.
And those people who may not be seen as credible or may not be accredited and all that, but who nonetheless have some legitimacy among certain portions of the population.
I think
And it comes back to my point that the government must engage everyone, because it is the government of everyone, and not just people who don't get involved in falsehood. It's everyone.
all right. Thank you, Mr. Loh. I've got no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Indeed, Mr. Loh, I think this select committee is engaging everyone, every stakeholder in this space, and for sure it requires a multi-pronged approach to resolving this.
Correct.
Ms. Chair, you have some questions?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Loh. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. And
Thank you.
I just want to clarify a few thoughts in my mind. We have heard quite a lot about, not just from you, but from other witnesses on, the issue of freedom of speech and so on and so forth. And it is also something that is of great concern to us on the committee. So Minister Shanmugam and I think a number of us on the committee have expressed that we are looking at facts and not opinions. And certainly you agreed that should be the correct approach that we should take, looking at facts rather than opinion.
I think who determines the facts? Because from my work, I know
Yeah.
that sometimes the facts are not facts, and it comes from the government, and therefore we have to accept it.
Okay, so
Uh,
assume that there is no dispute as to facts. I mean, conceptually, we should be looking at facts and not targeting differing opinions.
I think that is, broadly, I would not have any problem with that, but in practice, there is always, and Ms. Kirsten Han was saying yesterday, you know, sometimes we try to get the facts, but there's a roadblock. There's a wall that is put up. And when we are unable to get the facts and go ahead with the story, we are then, you know, accused of propagating falsehood. And that is a real problem for us, and that I hope the government will understand, you know, and that we are not troublemakers. I've been around for more than 10 years. I don't hide, you know, I'm not anonymous, right? When I started TOC in 2006, the very first thing I told my team was, we are not going to use pseudonyms. And that was very popular at that time because people were frightened, right? And we came out and we said, we are not going to use pseudonyms. Why? Because we are Singaporeans, right? And at the time, I know that the government was, the mainstream media at least, was demonizing us, sort of like painting us as perhaps unpatriotic. And therefore, when I started the website, I wanted to make a statement, and that's why I used the word online citizen, that although we are online, we are still citizens of Singapore. So we are all here and we are not hiding, right?
Yeah,
So, but
thank
when
you.
you engage, right, you bring people in and people see the other side of the story, the other side of the issue, and people understand better, right? And perhaps then they might not be so, you know, critical or so one-sided.
Yeah, I think indeed your stepping forward shows that you care enough to talk about all these issues openly. Of course, I'm not a journalist myself. As a lawyer, typically, if we have only partial information or a partial, and we would qualify our, you know, any opinion by saying this is what we know, this is not what we're not able to get, and this is what we heard.
Yes.
So I'm not sure how journalists do it, but I think that the fact that you started using your real names and not pseudonyms was a very, very big step. And here's where I would like to seek clarification from you, because I also have many people I know who are extremely critical of the government, and they post, you know, their views very openly on the websites, or their Facebook posts, right? So I'm trying to understand what we understand by freedom of speech and where we think the constraints should be, because the fact that many of us are able to openly post views that are critical of the government means that there is some latitude to exercise that freedom. So can you share with us where you think, you know, that, I mean, I don't think you're saying there's no freedom, but basically you're saying that there are certain unnecessary factors. So is that what you're trying to say? And that we should not add on anymore?
Yes, that's what I'm, basically that's what I'm trying to say.
So basically the point is that there is freedom of speech, but it is not as boundless as we would want it to be.
I think it's not in dispute that freedom of speech in Singapore has been curtailed and is not as free as in many other countries.
Yeah, but it is, yeah, I understand
Yes.
that. So I'm just trying to understand where the limits, what are the limits that you see, because we have also heard other witnesses who agree that freedom of speech cannot be absolute.
Yes.
And that it's always balanced against the public good.
Yes.
So the exercise of my right, as one judge says, you know, I can swing my arm as far as I want, but I have to stop short of somebody's nose.
Yes.
So the exercise of my right has got to be circumscribed in that manner, right?
Yes.
So therefore, when it comes to coming back again to the issue of, you know, deliberate falsehoods, what we are trying to do is to say that those have got to be addressed, and perhaps also not just a falsehood per se, but looking at the consequences
Yes.
that those falsehoods might give rise to. So I think many of us have agreed that, you know, when it comes to national security or religious, racial issues, there has got to be some circumspect behavior and responsibility in
Yes.
those. So you agree with that as well?
Yes, I agree with that. But
Okay.
I think the real issue here is threshold. What is the threshold that the government is willing to accept to allow people to debate?
Yeah.
And
So-
and for example, I think this idea that religion or race cannot or should not be debated openly, I'm not sure if that is the government's position, actually, but there seems to be this idea, among not a few Singaporeans, I would say, that as long as it has to do with race or religion, we should not talk about it. And I think that is very unfortunate because I think we should talk about it.
Indeed, I can't speak for the rest of my panelists, but I have also openly stated that we should discuss such issues
Yes.
because it helps us to strengthen our social cohesion. But
Yes.
again, that's not exactly what we're talking about here. So I'm just coming back now to the point of, using real names and anonymity in posting comments and writing posts, for example. Why do you think that it is no longer a cover for those with ill intent?
Simply because nobody can hide. And when I started TOC and throughout the years, I've always told people that, you can't hide. If you do something really bad, the government will find you. Period.
I can't.
Singapore is not very
I can't speak for the government, but okay. The reason why I ask is because also there have been views that when people put their name, their real name to it, there is a greater sense of accountability, and also more moderation. In that I become more responsible for what I say. Whereas if we don't and we allow anonymity, that there are those then who will just be vitriolic or do whatever, say whatever they want. So I don't want to hear your view on this because you said that it's no longer a cover.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think anonymity has a role. I'm not a big fan of it generally, but I think it has a role because I have worked with people who have to be anonymous in order to give me information. You see? So I know, it's like this broad brush that people use and say anonymity is a bad thing and all, but it is not.
No, I think I'm using it in the context of public discourse.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So when
I think
people,
with social media nowadays, very few people are anonymous except bots and perhaps, people with ill intentions.
does the TOC allow anonymous comments
Now,
then and now?
in the
or
past,
any
yes.
other?
Yes. Comments, yes. Articles, by and large, no.
Now
Yeah.
too, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so essentially, do you agree with? Do you agree that maybe we should? Okay, so I'll just move away from that point. But now coming back to the issue of whether we should look at consequences of what we say in the light of what you said about the importance of having intention and proving malicious intent. I'm not sure if you were here, but I asked the previous witness, what if someone said something that was racially inflammatory without any, malicious intent?
I think, like I said, it's a question of threshold. And I think the government has a different threshold than perhaps people like me. For example, for me, I think if someone makes a racially inflammatory remark, it really depends on what kind of remark it is.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so let me come back to you and say that if it is inflammatory in your view, and it is false, it is false and it's inflammatory by your criteria, what would you do? Would you publish that?
Oh, if it's sent to me?
Uh-huh.
No, of course not.
Okay, and then if you published it, what, and you were told, confronted with evidence that, you know, this is false and this is,
I think
what
we
would
have.
you do? And it satisfies your
Yes.
criteria?
I think when I was with TOC, we had a process within TOC for religious and racially sensitive articles. And that's why I think if you look at the first 9 years, 7 to 9 years that I was with them, we never had such articles, simply because there was a process. And in later years, we ran such articles through lawyers. So we are very careful, you know. But if it's something that is very inflammatory, and I would raise the example of, for example, Amos Z, right? His second offense of, you know, or rather it wasn't an offense at the time, but he did something on a video with a Bible. I shall not say what it is, but I found it utterly inflammatory and disgusting. But when I told friends about it, I was very surprised that some of them thought there's nothing wrong with it and that he should be allowed to do that and we should debate that. You see? So people have different thresholds, different, threshold of acceptance. Yeah.
But ultimately, someone has to decide whether it is bad
Yes,
for
of
the
course.
country and the public good.
Yes, of course.
And, okay, so who do you think should decide? Because I think yesterday, your former colleagues were saying that, you know, we should just let people decide, I think.
I think ultimately, right, it's the elected people, elected officials who are in parliament who have to decide. I think nobody can argue with that. But the question is, how big a threshold should Parliament have on these sort of things? You know, and I would argue, as did Dr. Gillian Cole, that we should allow, you know, public debate on sensitive issues like that. You know, if there is no immediate, to use the words of Professor Tan just now, you know, clear and present danger, right? The worry is that whatever legislation that the government might come out with will be focused on deterrence, on the preemptive strike. Yeah, and that to me is most worrying, because a law, I mean, all laws are deterrent, I suppose, but if it's specifically targeted to dissuade people from putting out falsehood, right? I think that might have consequences that, you know, I hope the committee will consider.
Mr. Chairman,
In terms of,
can I just clarify that, Mr. Loh, I don't think there has been any statement by anybody, either during the Green Paper debate, the various public statements, or members of this committee, that the government is looking at any preemptive strike. Would you agree that that formulation has not been used by us, and it is your presumption that it's...
No, actually, it was mentioned in Parliament by NMP. I think it was NMP Madhav Mohan. I have his...
Yes.
Yes. Yes, NMP Assistant Professor Madhav Mohan, he said in January 10 during the debate on the setting up of this select committee, he said preemptive measures, which is what the select committee would be thinking about.
No, I understand, Mr. Loh, but what I'm saying is that he was counseling not to have it. Yes?
Should be the main focus of legal solutions that we are putting together. This is what he said.
No, but you are saying that we should not have it. I'm saying that nobody has suggested that we are having it.
Yes, of course. I'm not suggesting that the select committee or anyone on the committee has said this.
Or the government has suggested
Yes,
this.
correct.
That
But
means presuming that it would be so, right? But
Yes.
we have not said that it would be so.
Yes, I'm not presuming.
Thank you very
I'm
much.
just saying that
Yes.
it has been brought up in Parliament, and therefore I would
No, I
like
understand.
to seek
But
clarification.
no one has put across that that is the intent.
Okay,
Thank you. I have no further questions.
thank you.
Mr. Tong?
Sorry, Mr. Loh, I just wanted to ask you to comment on something.
Sure.
In this ecosystem of DOFs, obviously there are those who carry the content, and there are those who prepare and post the content. You would agree that really for this to work, and you said it's got to be a everybody get involved approach.
Yes,
The people who produce the content have to be responsible.
yes,
Agree?
of course.
They have to be very clear with their facts, and I think they also have to be judicious
Yes,
in what they put out there and what they repost.
yes,
Correct? And I think you have yourself been critical on some of these occasions. And I just want to take you through some of your own posts to make the point. If I can just ask my colleagues to put up some of these posts from Mr. Loh, starting with the one on 1st of March 2016, which shows that I do read your posts.
sometimes I do change my mind though.
Well, let's see what you say about this one. So on the 1st of March, if you go to the top, yes, you say here, you made the point about the Straits Times comment, and you say, be very careful about third-party claims, check and check against always.
Yes,
That can't be something that you change your mind on, right?
yes, of course.
It must follow that this is something that online media or even mainstream media, whichever media, has to be
Yes.
responsible for.
Yes.
Because you do have a duty to the reading public
Yes.
to make sure that your facts that you put out are correct.
Yes, of course. And also, I would like to add that it's not always easy nor possible to check your fact and check again.
I take your point. I take
Yes.
your point. But nonetheless, I think at least on the occasion of this incident, you have made this point in the context of an article which you yourself believed to be misplaced criticism, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Now, if you go to the other one on 20th of March 2016, and this is about Bukit Batok and David Ong, and you say here, this is nonsense, it's not even an article, very disappointed with The Independent. A simple fact check would show that David Ong did in fact apologize. And that you said about this in the context of an article published on The Independent, which suggests that there was a lie that was being purveyed about Mr. Ong's apology, correct?
Yes.
So here, at least this episode illustrates that people do get facts very wrong
Yes,
out
of
there
course.
online. But you say that a very simple fact check, at least in this case, would have cured the problem.
Yeah, there are some things that are easily fact-checked, yes.
Yes. So not all facts are so difficult to check, correct?
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Yeah. But there are also facts that are very difficult to check.
Yes, but if you had done a simple fact check, as in this case, I think a very serious suggestion about an MP lying would not have pervaded the internet, right? So here's an example of something that can be done at very low threshold, simple fact check. But consequences of not fact checking the fact, you have a very damaging and very clickbaity kind of headline, correct?
Yes.
Yes. And that's what this set of countermeasures should be designed to guard against, right?
Yes, but how do you do that? You don't do that through legislation.
I agree with you that
Yeah.
the how is not a simple issue.
Yes.
It I think will include legislation, speaking for myself, but obviously all the suite of other measures that we spoke about earlier will come into
Yes.
play. Now another one, 7th of June. And here you say, sorry, but you deserve to be slammed if you publish things without checking simple facts. Saying a minister gets free hospitalization without providing any proof is just plain laziness. Sigh. Please don't anyhow publish anything. You will discredit the alternative media. Again, it's not a view that you have changed from as well, right?
Yes.
You still hold to that view.
Yes.
And just one more recently, 3rd of September 2017, in the context of clamping down on fake news, you posted something and you said here, another reason for the government to clamp down on fake news. We only have ourselves to blame, to be honest. No longer can we point the finger entirely at the government. And this, I think, reflects your view that there must be ownership of the veracity of the articles by the people who post them and by the people who carry them.
Yes.
And I think this also reflects your sentiment that there is, in fact, some basis for the government to be concerned that such false news is being purveyed so easily on the internet.
I think, to be fair, because I know some of these sites and how they operate, very bad, I think PM Bauji once called us the flattest organization in Singapore because, everyone is doing all the work at the same time because we don't have resources.
But I think we agree at this outset that there is a responsibility and a duty to
Of
the
course,
public.
there is.
So if you feel that you are bare, then and not able to fact check simple facts as you say here, then don't publish. If you publish, I think there is a corresponding duty expected of the publisher and the content provider that you verify the facts. You would accept that?
I'm not sure what went on before they published the articles here. My reaction is from seeing, the article itself. There could be various reasons why they were not able to do, what was, what should have been done.
I understand.
Yes.
And your comments here reflect your own view that a very simple, low-threshold fact check would have cured all these problems.
For this particular
For these posts that I've
cases,
showed you.
yes.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you,
Yes.
Mr. Loh.
If there are no further questions, Mr. Loh, I would like to thank you for taking the time to participate and to contribute to our select committee process. In a
Thank you.
couple of days, we will send to you a transcript of today's proceedings. Do go through it, and if you have any minor amendments, please make the changes and send the transcripts back to us.
Okay, sure. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the time here.
You're most welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Loh.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other matters? Okay. Much shorter session today. I think we finished taking evidence from all the witnesses scheduled for today. I think there are no other further matters. I will adjourn the proceedings till tomorrow, Thursday, 29th of March at 10 a.m. Thank you.